The millionaire's son had never spoken until she caught the blackmail nanny and her son singing a melody that made her world fall apart in seconds. Veronica Sterling stood in the doorway of the nursery, frozen, watching her 6-year-old son Julian sing a song in perfect German, while Jasper, the blackmail nanny she had hired out of desperation, accompanied him on the guitar. Julian, diagnosed with selective mutism at the age of 3, hadn't uttered a word in over 2 years. And now he was standing there, singing like an angel. "What the hell is going on here?" Veronica roared, making them both jump. Julian immediately fell silent, his brown eyes filling with terror, while Jasper quickly got up from the guitar. "Mrs. Sterling, I can explain." "Explain?" Veronica stormed into the room, her voice laden with a fury that made Julian run behind Jasper. "Explain how you made my son talk when the best specialists in Chicago said he might never speak again." Jasper Davies was 28 years old and knew exactly what that tone meant. In the last 2 months working for the Sterling family, he had come to realize that Veronica saw her son as a failed project, a social embarrassment that needed to be hidden from high society events. The woman spent fortunes on expensive therapists who treated Julian like a lab rat, but she had never tried to simply talk to him. "Ma'am, Julian has always been able to speak. He chooses when and with whom he speaks," Jasper replied calmly, placing his hand protectively on the boy's shoulder. "He chooses?" Veronica laughed scornfully. "He's 6 years old and practically mute. The doctors said it's a serious neurological disorder, and suddenly you, a nanny with no medical training, can cure him in 2 months?" The contempt in Veronica's voice was unmistakable. To her, Jasper was just another replaceable employee, hired because his salary demands were lower than the specialized agencies that had given up on Julian after a few weeks. "I didn't cure him, ma'am. I listened to him," Jasper said, feeling Julian squeeze his hand. "Julian tells me incredible stories every day. He knows 3 languages and plays 3 different instruments." "Lies." Veronica spat out the words. "My son can barely communicate. The medical reports are clear about his limitations." Then, Julian did something neither adult expected. He stepped out from behind Jasper, looked directly at his mother, and said in a clear, mature voice, "Mommy, I talk. I just don't talk to people who don't want to listen to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica turned pale as if she had seen a ghost, while Jasper smiled proudly at the boy's courage. "That's impossible," Veronica muttered, staggering backward. "The doctors, the tests, years of therapy?" Julian continued, his voice growing stronger. "Jasper asks me what I think. You only ask the doctors. What's wrong with me?" The devastating simplicity of that sentence hit Veronica like a slap in the face. She looked at her son, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not a broken child, but an intelligent, self-aware boy who had been silenced by a world that preferred to label him rather than understand him. But Veronica Sterling was not the kind of woman who admitted she was wrong, especially not in front of an employee she considered inferior. Her expression hardened again. "Jasper, you're fired. I want you out of my house right now." "No," Julian screamed, clinging to Jasper's shirt. "He can't leave. He's the only one who understands me." Veronica completely ignored her son's despair. "You've manipulated my son somehow. I don't know what tricks you've used, but that's enough for today." Jasper remained calm, even as he watched Julian begin to cry silently. There was something in the nanny's determined gaze that made Veronica hesitate for a second, as if he knew something she didn't. "As you wish, Mrs. Sterling," Jasper said softly. "But before I go, Julian has something to show you. Something that might change your perspective on your own son. You have 15 minutes to gather your things and get off my property," Veronica declared, pulling her cell phone from her pocket. "And if you try to contact my son again, I'll call my lawyers." Jasper watched the woman dial a number, probably for the private security agency that looked after the mansion. Veronica Sterling was exactly the kind of person he had learned to recognize after years of working for Chicago's elite families, rich enough to buy anything except the ability to see her own child as a complete human being. "Mrs. Sterling," Jasper said calmly, even though he could see Julian still clinging to his shirt. "Can I at least explain what I've discovered about Julian over the last 2 months?" "There's nothing to discover," Veronica cut him off, hanging up the phone. "My son has clear limitations diagnosed by competent professionals. You're not a doctor. You're not a therapist. You're just a nanny who managed to teach a few tricks to a confused child." The word "just" echoed through the room like a slap. Jasper Davies had graduated from a prestigious university with honors in child psychology, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had specializations in cognitive development and childhood trauma. But to Veronica, he would always be just a black male nanny she had hired for 20% less than what specialized agencies charged. "Mommy, please," Julian begged, his first words to his mother in over 2 years. "Jasper taught me that I'm smart. He teaches me things the doctors never did." Veronica didn't even look at her son. Her eyes remained fixed on Jasper with a coldness he knew all too well, the look of someone accustomed to discarding people like disposable objects. "Julian, go to your room. The new nanny will arrive tomorrow morning," she ordered as if she were talking to a disobedient dog. "I don't want a new nanny," Julian screamed, clutching Jasper's shirt even tighter. "I want Jasper. He doesn't treat me like I'm broken." It was then that Veronica did something that shocked even Jasper, who was accustomed to the disguised cruelty of high society. She picked Julian up with excessive force, completely ignoring his screams and pleas, and handed him to Carmen, the housekeeper who had appeared at the door. "Carmen, take Julian to his room and lock the door. He doesn't come out until I've sorted this out," she said, as if giving instructions about the trash. "Jasper," Julian yelled as he was dragged out of the room, his tears echoing down the hallway. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." The sound of Julian's bedroom door locking cut through the air like a gunshot. Jasper stood motionless, processing the utter coldness of this woman who had just traumatized her own son to maintain her convenient version of reality. Now Veronica turned to Jasper with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You have 10 minutes. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call security." Jasper Davies had grown up in a working-class family, the son of a mechanic and a waitress. He knew intimately the feeling of being underestimated, dismissed, and treated as inferior by people who confused money with intelligence. But he had also learned something that Veronica Sterling had yet to discover. The most dangerous people are those you completely underestimate. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, keeping his voice, even as he gathered his bag, "can I ask you a simple question?" Veronica glanced at the diamond-encrusted watch on her wrist with theatrical impatience. "Quick! Do you really believe your son is incapable, or are you afraid to find out that he's smarter than you think?" The question hit Veronica like a punch to the stomach. She took a step toward Jasper, her fists clenched. "How dare you question my ability as a mother? I've spent a fortune on experts, therapies, treatments. I've done everything for my son." "Everything except listen to him," Jasper replied softly. "Julian doesn't need more therapists, ma'am. He needs a mother who believes in him." Veronica laughed scornfully. Parenting advice from a babysitter in his 20s who doesn't even have children. What a joke. Jasper opened his bag and took out a small digital recorder. "Mrs. Sterling, over the past 2 months, Julian has told me many things. Stories about how he feels when the doctors talk about him as if he isn't there. How sad he gets when you cancel dinner parties because you're ashamed to take him out. How he pretended he couldn't walk properly during a doctor's appointment because he realized that the more limited he appeared, the more attention he got." Veronica's face gradually paled as Jasper spoke. Your son is not mute, Mrs. Sterling. He is a brilliant child who has learned that silence is the only way to get affection in a home where being different is treated like a disease. Veronica violently snatched the tape recorder from Jasper's hands. You weren't allowed to record anything in this house. This is an invasion of privacy. Julian gave me permission, Jasper replied calmly. He wanted someone to finally hear his voice. And there are many more recordings, ma'am. 2 hours of conversations where your son demonstrates an advanced vocabulary, knowledge of classical music, and an emotional understanding that would impress any psychologist. Reality began to form in Veronica's eyes like a distant storm. For the first time, she understood that she had completely underestimated not only her son, but also the man standing in front of her. What do you want? She asked, her voice trembling. Jasper smiled for the first time since Veronica had entered the room. It wasn't a smile of victory, but something much more dangerous. The expression of someone who possesses information that can destroy carefully constructed worlds. I want you to stop treating your son like a failed project and start seeing him as the extraordinary child he has always been. But more than that. He paused, pulling another recorder from his sleeve. I want you to understand that some people you consider just employees know exactly how to document inconvenient truths. From the hallway, Julian could still be heard crying in his locked bedroom, calling Jasper's name. The sound cut through the tense air between the two adults, like a constant reminder that at the center of this battle of wills was a 6-year-old child who just wanted to be understood. Veronica looked at Jasper with a mixture of anger and something she recognized as fear. For the first time in her life, she had found someone who was not intimidated by her money, her social status, or her threats. Someone who possessed something she could not buy. The truth about who she really was as a mother. Every new humiliation Veronica tried to inflict only fueled something inside Jasper that she couldn't see. A determination forged in years of fighting prejudices far worse than hers. What this privileged woman didn't know was that every act of contempt was providing him with exactly the ammunition he needed for a war she didn't even realize she was losing, proving that sometimes the greatest strength grows at the very moment others believe they have broken our spirit. 3 days had passed since Jasper had been expelled from the Sterling mansion, and Veronica believed she had finally solved the problem of the inconvenient nanny. She had hired a new caregiver through the most expensive agency in Chicago. Serafina Foster, a 60-year-old British woman with impeccable credentials, and more importantly, the absolute discretion she demanded. Julian hasn't said a word since the new nanny arrived, Carmen reported nervously, finding Veronica in her home office. He refuses to leave his room, isn't eating properly, and is making those strange noises again when he gets upset. Veronica didn't even look up from her financial reports. That's natural. He needs to adjust to the new routine. Miss Foster is a qualified professional, not an improviser. The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Veronica answered impatiently, but her expression changed dramatically when she heard the voice on the other end of the line. Mrs. Sterling, this is Marcus Davies from the law firm Davies & Associates. I represent my brother Jasper Davies in a matter that may be of mutual interest. Veronica motioned for Carmen to leave and closed the office door. I don't know what you're talking about. That man was fired for just cause. Interesting. The lawyer's voice was calmly professional. Because I have here a rather extensive dossier on racial discrimination and child abuse. My client has meticulously documented his experiences in your home. This is extortion, Veronica roared, but her voice betrayed her nervousness. I have the best lawyers in Chicago. That nanny can't afford to take me on. Marcus Davies chuckled softly. Mrs. Sterling, you may not know that my brother graduated with highest honors in child psychology, has a specialization in child trauma and cognitive development, and is currently pursuing a master's degree in children's rights at Northwestern University. He also maintains a blog on child development that is followed by over 200,000 professionals in the field. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Veronica felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. But what's most interesting, the lawyer continued, are the recordings he has, not only of Julian demonstrating exceptional cognitive abilities, but also of certain revealing conversations about how you refer to your own son when you think no one is listening. Veronica vaguely remembered the time she had spoken on the phone with doctors, referring to Julian as a lost cause or a dead end. She had always thought she was alone in her office. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "For now, just a civil conversation. My client is not vindictive, Mrs. Sterling. He genuinely cares about Julian's well-being, but he also won't allow a brilliant child to be harmed by parental prejudice." Meanwhile, across town, Jasper sat in a small apartment he shared with two fellow master students, carefully reviewing months of notes, recordings, and photographs. Every interaction with Julian had been documented not out of malice, but out of an academic habit of recording exceptional child development. Dr. Mei Chen, Jasper's mentor and professor of child psychology at Northwestern, analyzed the recordings with a look of growing outrage. "Jasper, this is extraordinary. Julian not only demonstrates superior intelligence, but has developed sophisticated coping mechanisms to deal with systematic emotional neglect. This child is protecting his own mental health through selective mutism." "I know," Jasper replied calmly. "And his mother thinks she's healing Julian with therapists who treat him like he's mentally disabled. She's causing irreversible psychological damage." Dr. Chen picked up one of the recordings where Julian sang an entire opera in Italian. "With your permission, I'd like to present this case at next week's Child Development Conference. It's a perfect example of how family biases can mask giftedness." "Not yet," Jasper said, carefully putting the files away. "First, Veronica Sterling needs to understand that her son is not a problem to be hidden away. He is a gift that she is wasting." Back at the mansion, Serafina Foster tried unsuccessfully to get Julian to eat something during dinner. The boy remained silent, pushing his food around his plate with a distant expression. "He used to be like this before the other nanny arrived," Veronica explained coldly to the new employee. "This is his normal behavior. Don't be fooled by theatrical tricks." Serafina, an experienced professional, watched Julian with growing concern. In 40 years of caring for children, she had never seen a boy so clearly traumatized being treated with such indifference by his own mother. "Mrs. Sterling," she said cautiously, "perhaps the child would benefit from a more personalized approach. He obviously possesses above-average intelligence. Julian has clear limitations diagnosed by experts." Veronica cut her off. "Don't encourage fantasies. That's exactly what the previous nanny did, filling his head with impossibilities." That night, after Veronica retired to her office, Serafina tried a different approach. She sat down next to Julian and whispered, "I know you can hear me, sweetheart. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I would really like to get to know you better." Julian looked up for the first time in 3 days. Slowly, he wrote something on a napkin and handed it to Serafina. "Is Jasper coming back?" It read in surprisingly mature handwriting. Serafina looked at the boy, seeing for the first time not a troubled child, but a desperately lonely little boy. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I do know that you are much more special than anyone in this house realizes." Julian smiled sadly and wrote another sentence. Jasper knew that. As Serafina tried to process the emotional complexity of the 6-year-old, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Hello, Serafina. I'm Jasper Davies, Julian's previous nanny. I know you're a serious professional and that you must be noticing strange things in the family dynamic. If you want to talk about what's really going on in this house, please reach out to me. Julian needs our help." Serafina looked at Julian, who had fallen asleep on the couch, still clutching the napkin with his questions about Jasper. For the first time in her career, an experienced professional found herself questioning whether being in a home was more harmful than beneficial to a child. Across town, Jasper was finishing organizing what he had begun to call Project Julian, a complete documentation that would prove not only the boy's genius, but the systematic neglect he suffered. Marcus Davies had made it clear that they had a solid legal case, but Jasper wanted something more satisfying than a court victory. He wanted Veronica Sterling to publicly acknowledge the extraordinary son she had ignored for years. Because some people only learn when they lose everything they thought they had. And Veronica was about to discover that she had underestimated not just a competent nanny, but a man who would turn every act of contempt into fuel for a justice that would completely reshape Julian's future. Proving that sometimes the best revenge is simply to reveal the truth that people try so desperately to hide. A week later, Veronica Sterling woke up to a series of notifications on her cell phone that made her blood run cold. The first was an email from the Illinois Department of Children's Services requesting an urgent family welfare assessment for the Sterling home. The second was a missed call from her personal lawyer. The third was a message that would change her life forever. Mrs. Sterling, press conference today at 3 p.m. at Northwestern University's Children's Rights Center. Your presence is recommended. J.D. Veronica rushed to her office and immediately called Marcus Davies. What the hell is going on? Why does social services want to evaluate my home? Mrs. Sterling. Her lawyer's voice was tense. You need to come to my office right now. We have a much more serious situation than we thought. An hour later, Veronica was sitting in a conference room watching a presentation that systematically destroyed everything she believed about herself as a mother. Dr. May Chen, one of the country's most respected child development experts, conducted the presentation with surgical precision. These recordings were made over a 2-month period by a qualified professional with the express permission of the child. Dr. Chen explained, playing the audio of Julian singing an entire opera in Italian. As you can hear, the boy possesses not only exceptional vocal ability, but linguistic mastery that indicates giftedness. Veronica was pale but tried to maintain her composure. These recordings were made without my permission. They're illegal. Actually, they're not. Marcus Davies shook his head gravely. Illinois law allows educational documentation when there is suspicion of child development neglect. And there's more. The next recording was even more devastating. Julian's voice, clear and articulate, explaining to Jasper, "Mommy always tells the doctors that I don't understand things. She talks about me as if I'm not there. Yesterday, she said on the phone that I'm a non-returnable investment and that maybe she should send me to a special boarding school." Veronica felt her world collapse. She vaguely remembered that phone call, thinking she was alone in her office. There are 17 hours of similar material, Dr. Chen continued relentlessly. Julian consistently demonstrates superior intelligence, emotional stability when treated appropriately, and a painful understanding of how he is perceived by his mother. But the worst was yet to come. The projector screen showed a series of medical reports from the last 3 years, all signed by Veronica, all downplaying or distorting Julian's actual abilities. Most disturbing, Dr. Chen said, is the correspondence we discovered between Mrs. Sterling and Julian's therapists. Emails where she explicitly asks them to maintain diagnoses that justify his social disability, her exact words. Veronica tried to stand, but her lawyer held her back by the arm. Sit down and listen. It's not over yet. Jasper Davies entered the room carrying a bulging folder. He showed no anger or vindictive satisfaction, just the quiet determination of someone who had meticulously documented an injustice. "Mrs. Sterling," he said calmly, "for 2 months, Julian told me about how he pretended to have greater difficulties than he actually did because he realized that the more limited he seemed, the more attention he got from his mother. A 6-year-old child, manipulating adults to get basic affection. Veronica finally exploded. "You manipulated my son! You taught him to lie, to pretend he has abilities he doesn't have." "Actually," Dr. Chen interrupted, "the neurological tests we've done over the past few weeks confirm that Julian has never had any cognitive limitations. The selective mutism was a response to systematic emotional neglect." Jasper opened the folder, revealing hundreds of drawings, musical compositions, and even short poems that Julian had created during those 2 months. "Julian didn't need to be cured, Mrs. Sterling. He needed to be seen." "But the doctors," Veronica stammered. "The doctors responded to your expectations," Marcus Davies explained coldly. "When an influential and wealthy parent repeatedly insists that their son has limitations, professionals tend to find evidence that confirms that narrative, especially when that parent pays very well for convenient diagnoses." The final blow came when Dr. Chen played the most recent recording, made just 3 days earlier, with Julian conversing fluently with Serafina Foster about philosophy and advanced mathematics. "What amazes me most," Julian's voice echoed through the room, "is how Mom never realized that I always knew she was ashamed of me. I just pretended to be more limited because it seemed like the only way she would pay attention to me." Veronica collapsed into her chair. All her arrogance evaporated. I just wanted to protect him. I wanted him to be normal, happy." "You wanted him to fit into your version of normal," Jasper corrected gently. "And when he didn't, you'd rather believe he was broken than accept that maybe your definition of normal was too limited." Marcus Davies placed a document in front of Veronica. "The Department of Children's Services is considering a supervised joint custody plan. Julian will continue to live with you, but with mandatory psychological counseling. Not for him, for you. And there's more." Dr. Chen added, "Julian will be integrated into a program for gifted children at Northwestern, where his abilities will be properly stimulated. Mr. Davies will be his official educational tutor." Veronica looked at Jasper with a mixture of anger and something that looked like despair. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to be the mother Julian deserves," Jasper replied simply. "I want you to see your son as the extraordinary child he has always been. And I want you to understand that some of the people you consider just employees may see treasures that you yourself have overlooked." Today's press conference, Marcus informed her, will present Julian's case as a groundbreaking study of how family biases can mask giftedness. "My brother will be recognized as an associate researcher at Northwestern." Veronica finally understood the full extent of her defeat. Not only had she lost credibility as a mother, but the simple nanny she had despised was about to be celebrated nationally as the person who saved a gifted child from years of intellectual neglect. "Does Julian know all this?" she asked, her voice breaking. Jasper smiled for the first time. "Julian helped plan everything. He really wants his mom to learn to see him for who he is. He told me, 'Jasper, Mommy isn't bad. She just forgot how to look at me without being afraid.'" The forgiveness implicit in those words from a 6-year-old was more devastating to Veronica than any legal punishment could have been. She had been defeated not by anger or revenge, but by the wisdom and compassion of her own son, a boy whose genius she had systematically ignored because he didn't fit into her narrow mold of normality. 6 months later, Veronica Sterling sat in the front row of the Northwestern University auditorium, watching her 6-year-old son receive a Medal of Honor for academic excellence. Julian, now fluent in 5 languages and the composer of 3 original musical pieces, shined on stage like the child prodigy he had always been. "Mommy," he whispered as he stepped off the stage, "are you proud of me now?" Veronica hugged her son, tears streaming down her face. "I've always been proud of you, Prince." I just had to learn to see it." Jasper Davies, now a nationally recognized doctoral candidate and child development consultant, watched from the audience alongside Dr. Mei Chen. His book, Invisible Children: How Prejudice Kills Potential, had become a bestseller. Veronica approached him after the ceremony. "Jasper, I'm so sorry. You don't need to apologize," he interrupted gently. "You need to keep being the mother Julian always knew you could be." Serafina Foster, who had become a key ally in the family's transformation, smiled as she watched Julian run through the garden with other gifted children. Jasper's true revenge was not to destroy Veronica Sterling, but to transform her into the mother Julian deserved. He proved that sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating our enemies, but saving them from themselves.